Okay, shalom everybody. I'm going to do a book review of the Book of Jubilees. So essentially, the Book of Jubilees it was written in Hebrew originally, and it was then translated into Greek, and then from the Greek, it was translated into Ethiopian language. I forgot to mention it was also translated into Syriac, from Hebrew into Greek and Syriac, and then from Greek into Latin and Ethiopic. So the version that was found first was the Ethiopic version that was discovered around I believe the 15th century, if I'm getting it right. Let me just double check here. Yeah, so it is accepted, was accepted, still is accepted by Ethiopian Jews as canon, as well as mostly just them. And it was also well known to early believers, early Christians, you could say. There's proof of that by various writings of church fathers. I don't like using the word church, but anyway, that's how they describe them. People like Origen, Epiphanes, and so on. So, yes, they were discovered initially by, I believe it was R.H. Charles, from the Ethiopian manuscripts. That was back in, when was that, during his lifetime? Sorry, I'm trying to look at when was this discovered. Anyway, it was discovered initially from the Ethiopian manuscripts. And I can't seem to find a date at the moment, but anyway, it was most likely in the 15th century, 15th, 18th century. Yeah, I can't seem to find a date. I don't know why. Maybe just I'm trying to hurry this up. Oh, here it is. Okay, so 15th to 16th century was discovered, the Ethiopian text. That language is called Ge'ez. I don't know how to pronounce that. G-E apostrophe E-Z. So people had assumed that because it was discovered 15th, 16th century, that the date of when it was written was not a long time ago. They're assuming must be more recent. But until they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, they realized that no, these are actually much older than we initially believed. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, as we know, they date back even around the time of the Septuagint, which is 300 to 400 years before Yeshua. And the Book of Jubilees is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, not a complete version, but fragments. There are parts of it, which would lead me to believe, anything in there, in my opinion, Dead Sea Scrolls is inspired. It is meant to be in our scriptures. And the Ethiopian church, they have had the wisdom to preserve it, and they include it as their canon, as inspired. So, okay, so now I'm just going to talk about the content of the book. So some people believe it was written by a devout Jew, whereas the Book of Jubilees tells you explicitly it was written by Moses. Moses is the writer. Just because you discover it at a certain point of time does not mean it isn't written by the author that it claims to have been written by. If you read the narrative, it says that the angels are the ones speaking to Moses. So it would make sense that it's either Moses or maybe even Joshua writing, but because Joshua was his assistant. But no, it is Moses who is the author. So just going to go through some of the content here and then give you my opinions on this book. So again, this book, the Book of Jubilees, is also known as the the Lesser or Little Genesis. It is 50 chapters in total. And so it is divided into Jubilees, which are a period of 49 years. Whereas, the 50th is the Jubilee, but I mean, 49-year periods is how you count multiple Jubilees. It's by 49 years. So as to the content, so Jubilees, the best way I can put it is you have, the four Gospels, right? You have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so Genesis, what we have today as what we know as Genesis today, Book of Jubilees is kind of like, if Genesis was Matthew, then Jubilees is more like Luke, but not simply Luke and giving you a different angle, but giving you much more detail. A lot more information is given in the Book of Jubilees. Whereas if somebody tells you, today I went to Jerusalem, I took a trip to Jerusalem, and I visited the Temple Mount. That's all they tell you. Whereas the Book of Jubilees is more like, this is what happened. This is how I got there. This is what happened when I was in Jerusalem. They give you the full story, like every minor detail. And the Book of Jubilees does that. They really get into the motivations of what was going through people's hearts and minds and rationale as to why, for example, when we're looking at, what was it, Isaac? Yeah, Isaac and Rebecca. There's a story, just for an example, Isaac favored, he loved Esau. And then it says that Rebecca loved Jacob. She preferred Jacob. They both had their favorites. In Genesis, it only says, okay, they just preferred them. It doesn't say why. It doesn't give you the complete story and the backstory. And doesn't even tell you about Abraham being there, because Abraham was alive. According to the Book of Jubilees, it says that he actually favored Jacob as well. And he pushed his daughter-in-law, Rebecca, to keep on that, to continue favoring Jacob over Esau, because of what Jehovah had told him, that unto your seed will be the promise. And that promise is obviously to Isaac, who was the father of Jacob, but it's only one of the two. It can't be both Esau and Jacob. So Jehovah, inspired Abraham, was able to make Abraham understand that of the two of those, it is Jacob who the promise is on. So that is why he favored him, not simply just, human beings have favorites. It's much more deep than that. So just an example like that, it gives you the full narrative, the complete narrative, the full motivations behind it, gives you the full emotion too. I found myself crying reading it, just because, you read the narratives of the Bible and the Tanakh, and sometimes, a good example is Genesis 29:20, where it says, and Jacob served Laban for 7 years for Rachel, but they seemed to him like a few days for the love he had for her. Now, we don't get too many of those kinds of, kind of touchy-feely descriptions in the Bible, especially, in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew scriptures. But in the Book of Jubilees, you have that in spades, to the point that I'm thinking, wow, people criticize the Bible as, being, not a good read in some ways. Some people don't perceive it that way. But, I'm not a fan of romance novels per se. I don't really read those. But the Book of Jubilees is probably the closest you'll get to a romance novel. And I'm not making fun of it, or I'm using it as a compliment, because I really could feel it in my heart, and I could identify with it more as a human being. These people are more fleshed out. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Rebecca, everyone in the book, most of the main characters, you can sympathize more with and empathize with as well. So I'm very thankful that, this book has been preserved and we can read it. So it talks about the angels. There's so many details about that. I'm not going to go into that. That could be its own video. Similar to the Book of Enoch, how it goes into more details and more information about the angels. It talks about Adam and Eve. It talks about how how Hebrew is the language of heaven. It really is a set apart language. I have no doubt about that. It really was the language of creation. Hebrew was or is, because it's still spoken today, obviously. And it says describes how animals used to have the ability to speak. We don't know what language that was, right? We don't know what language it was, but we get a glimpse of that in Numbers. I believe it was Numbers 22, I think, where the mouth of the donkey was opened, which means, human beings can understand what that donkey was saying, specifically his owner, which was Balaam. So that only would it would just lead you to conclude that Adam and Eve could understand the animals, because Adam had all the animals brought to him, just like it says in Genesis, and he named them all. So how would he name them unless they understood what he was saying? If he said, "Hey, you over there, you are an elephant," an elephant would understand it? No, they would understand, and they would probably respond back in the same language. But it says how in the Book of Jubilees, how the animals' mouths, their ability to speak was then removed. It was, their mouths were closed. But anything is possible. All things are possible with Jehovah. You can always reverse that, and he did do that in Numbers 22. It talks about so many details about the flood, about the Tower of Babel, about the Exodus. There's really so much there. It's so rich. I strongly recommend it. And the question of the title of this video, is it inspired? It is 100% inspired. There is no doubt in my mind that it is inspired. It was originally written in Hebrew, and this is proven from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which means it was originally part of the Hebrew canon. It was part of the Hebrew scriptures originally, but over time it's been removed because of things that various reasons. Apparently there's a messianic prophecy, according to R.H. Charles, saying that the Messiah is not to come from Levi, but from Judah. So I mean, that's all I have to say about this book. It really is, it's a great read. Whatever my faith was before this book, it increased. And my excitement for the word of Elohim just increased so much more. Let me just show you the version I read. This is the one I read. Just look at the camera there. So this is the one I read. It's this version. I'll put the link. I'll post the link in the description. It was translated from the Ethiopic by Reverend George H. Schad or Scott. I don't think it's Shada, PhD from Capital University, Columbus, Ohio, and that was in the year 1888. Okay, so this version actually, I think it predates the R.H. Charles version, and it's a very good translation. It's not hard to understand it. It isn't like the King James version or Old English. It was very much in a modern kind of vernacular, in my opinion. I didn't have to look up too many words. It's great. I'm so happy about this, that Jehovah preserved it, especially in a language that we can understand in English. And I strongly recommend it. So next, I just started the book of Jasher. And as you know, in the book, the Sefer, there's this book called the Sefer. They decided to include the book of Enoch, the book of Jubilees, and the book of Jasher. And I believe they were inspired to do that because in those three books, there's a lot that we really, I believe, need to know. There's a lot to do with the end times in those. They're very inspirational, very encouraging, strongly encouraging. Whatever your faith was before you read these books, Enoch, Jubilees, and Jasher, and I strongly recommend the Ethiopic version. This one. This is by Lawrence, the one translated by Lawrence. This one here, Richard Lawrence. And then I have the other one, the Book of Jasher, somewhere around there. I was just reading it. So anyway, I'm trying to be more efficient with my time. I do realize that people don't have, you know, people want to be efficient with their time, and I need to be mindful of that, and to be more conservative with the time, and just explain things more concisely and thoroughly, but to do so in a way that is easier to digest. So I'm going to think. I'm thinking of re-recording some of the longer videos I've done, and try to put them more into a more shortened structure, kind of like what I did with the History of Mankind, where initially it was 2 hours, over 2 hours, but then I condensed it into, I think, less than 30 minutes. So shalom. Jehovah bless you all. May He set His angels over you, and protect you in these challenging times for everybody, but they are meant to perfect us, and to set us apart for that day when He does return, which is very soon. So shalom again, and may Jehovah make your way prosperous. Thank you. That's the Book of Jubilees.